I can tell that dopamine is the neuromodulator of the anticipation of reward. It's not reward per se, it's the anticipation of the reward. And that's really part of the experience. That's really part of the experience. And if you're doing something that doesn't require any struggle, you're not going to get anticipation of reward in the same way. That's how pleasure and pain are so interwoven with each other. It's such a complicated phenomenon where you can't get real pleasure unless there is also pain, because of this really delicate interplay between the ideas. So as everybody who watches your podcast knows, dopamine is this very potent neuromodulator that gives us impulse to do almost anything. And it's ever present in the way that it gives us motivation to do things. So for example, I want to get a sandwich, and I think about it at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm kind of hungry. Just thinking about the sandwich gives me dopamine, and then it dives down. And the fact that it's going down, which I feel gives me motivation to get the dopamine back up again to go in search of the sandwich. And then around noon, I'm going to go out to the deli, my favorite deli, to get the sandwich. And the dopamine is back up again. And then the deli's closed, and then it tanks. And so I look for another deli. And then when I finally get it, the dopamine screams upward, and then I finish the sandwich and it goes back down again. And it's just this of anticipation of reward and more anticipation and search. That's one of the reasons, by the way, the science of happiness is so critical to understand. Because when you do, you'll see it in yourself, and you can manage it.
Well, it's also about balance. Satisfaction, do hard things. Yeah. I imagine, I know myself well enough to know that I'll take that all the way to the wall. That turns into perfectionism and self-flagellation. It's no good unless I stay up all night and I'm exhausted when I'm done. I can't get that satisfaction unless I know, I'm bleeding out of my eyeballs by the time it's completed, and that's no good.
That's no good. And that's, that's just an extreme form of, people who do extreme things do extreme things. And they engage in all sorts of extreme behaviors is what we find. And so that's just going to be a normal part of your personality is what we find. And
but
so
you have to erect guardrails around
for sure.
that.
Absolutely. We have to manage ourselves. We either we manage our feelings or they're going to manage us. That's the bottom line. That's actually one of the key points of this book is emotional self-management, is the whole idea that you can, through metacognition, understand the nature of your urges and desires and emotions. And there are practices, protocols you can put in your place in your life to put space between your impulses and your reactions. You can be the manager. Your prefrontal cortex can govern your limbic system because you choose your reactions if you actually know how it's done. So there's a whole bunch of very practical lessons on how to do that.
I want to get deeper into metacognition, but let's put a pin on that for now and just stick with getting through these the three macros here. So the final one is purpose.
Yeah. Well, before we get to that, by the way, there is this problem of not being able to keep any satisfaction that has always seemed like the tyranny of life. When I move to California, it's going to be so great because it's going to be so sunny forever. And after 6 months, I was just as depressed as I was, but the taxes are forever. Or the new car smell wears off, or, I thought that I was going to love having that house, and now it's just a house. But there is a way to defeat that. It's just a very unnatural feeling thing to do, which is instead of this notion that satisfaction comes from more. What's your secret? More is to remember that this real satisfaction can be modeled as all of your haves divided by your wants. Haves divided by wants. Now we know that to increase the satisfaction, you can increase the numerator. Manage your wants is to want less. I literally have an exercise that I take my students through that I practice myself. On my birthday, I used to have a bucket list. And the bucket list is, all your ambitions and desires, and you imagine yourself enjoying all these wonderful things. I now have a reverse bucket list, where I take all of my ambitions and desires and worldly stuff, money and, success, and I might get it or I might not, but I cross out the attachment. So it's no longer a ghost in my head, in my limbic system governing me. I make the decision using my executive capacity that I will no longer be governed by that, and it absolutely works. The reverse bucket list is an incredibly effective way, metacognitively, for you to manage these desires. And in so doing, your satisfaction lasts. It's more enduring. It satiates. It's less. Well, yeah, I guess I'll feel better if I buy something on the internet. I guess I'll feel that you'll fall prey much, much less to that. So I wind up talking a lot about wanting less as opposed to having more.
That requires a jujitsu black belt level of discipline and determination. Like overcoming your default settings around desire and wants it doesn't come easy or naturally.
But once you're thinking about it, you will do it. This is the key, is being conscious, being awake.
Well, this is the metacognition. So why don't we just talk about it now?
Yeah.
I mean, basically, metacognition is this means of managing your emotions, self-regulating, having enough presence of mind and awareness to understand what's occurring emotionally within you as a result of generally some external stimulation.
Right.
And being able to gauge it and have that extra moment and choose an appropriate and better, more adaptive emotional response to that scenario rather than reflexively reacting.
Right. That's right. And when your kids were little and they were screaming their heads off because you didn't cut the sandwich vertically or horizontally, you cut it diagonally or something, and they were yelling, and you said, use your words. That what you were telling them is to become metacognitive. To be conscious of their feelings and to articulate those feelings. You're asking them to move the experience of their distress into their prefrontal cortex of your brain. So the limbic system is very ancient, and its whole job is delivering feelings to your prefrontal cortex so you can decide what to do with them. So you can decide whether or not, flip off the driver who almost hit you or whatever it happens to be. But the emotions, the reactions, they're innate coming from your limbic system to keep you alive. The problem is that little kids can't make that connection, and a lot of adults don't either. You see that when somebody is reactive, a really reactive person, they have an emotion, they spill the emotion. They think something is funny, they laugh. They think something is stupid, they yell. Whatever it happens. People with bad tempers, they tend to be really reactive. They can get much better at not being reactive. They can be less limbic. And the way to do that is putting more space between stimulus and response. There's basically three techniques for doing that, for how to be less governed by your feelings. Number one, what they all require, by the way, is more time between what you feel and what you do, is getting better at putting time. And, so your grandmother, Grandma Roll probably said, Richie, when you feel angry, count to 10, something like that, right? The truth is that the data are very clear that she was mostly right, but it takes about 30 seconds. The best way when you're angry or you're about to say something and you're about to wreck the next 48 hours of your marriage by what you're about to say is stop and count to 30 and imagine the consequences of saying what first came to your mind, which was the limbic thing that you were about to say. That gives the experience time to be registered in the prefrontal cortex, and you can have a better reaction. You can choose a better reaction. That's number one. Choose a better reaction. Number two is to choose a better emotion. You can actually choose a better emotion that's also appropriate to the circumstances, but it has to be chosen in the prefrontal cortex. And the last is to disregard the emotion and simply observe the situation. These are three very strong techniques that are backed up in the literature, but they all require that we take simply time between what we feel and how we react.
There's what that looks like on paper, and then there's what that looks like in practice.
Right.
We all know what it's like to be in a supercharged emotional state.
Right.
We're not in control of our best reactive self in that scenario. It's only in the aftermath where we're able to kind of realize what we have just said or done.
Right.
So buying that sliver of additional time is challenging, because you're being asked to do it in the very state of mind and being in which it's most difficult to access.
I know. And that's called amygdala hijack, by the way. The amygdala is the part of the limbic system of the brain most associated with fear and anger. And it just lights up. So, when a car almost runs you over and you're a pedestrian on the sidewalk and the car almost hits you, that crosses your visual cortex, passes down the retinal nerve, and is actually registers in the occipital lobe of your brain as a large predator. So what that does is it sends a signal to your amygdala. It just lights up the amygdala that says, alarm, you're about to be eaten by this enormous predator, attacked by this enormous predator. That sends a signal through the hypothalamus of the brain to the pituitary glands, then down to the adrenal glands above your kidneys, spitting out stress hormones, all in 74 milliseconds. That thing goes down in 74 1,000ths of a second. You're 3 to 4 seconds behind in your prefrontal cortex. and what you're going to do. You've already flipped off the driver and you're shaking and sweating before you even know what has happened. And your amygdala, your limbic system, has just saved your life. That's the bottom line and how important that is. That's why all of this takes practice. And there are good ways to practice this, as a matter of fact. So if a lot of people watching us have a bad temper, I don't have a big temper problem. I have other problems, but I don't have a big temper problem. Anybody who has a big temper problem and it's hurting their relationships. Let's say you're married or you have a girlfriend and you're snapping at her and it's not right. Say, I'm going to make a decision that when I start to get hot, I'm going to say to her, I'm trying to work on my temper. And so what I want to do is I want to sort of take it down a notch. I want to sit down here for a second and I want to pick up the conversation here in a minute. Is that okay? And your wife will be like, would you like convert to a new religion or